All right, economic growth and how to measure it. Let's get into it. Okay, so here are the objectives for today. We need to know the definition, how to measure it, how we calculate it, the causes and consequences of a recession, the details of a recession, the details of economic growth, and policies the government use to try to promote economic growth. Now, what is GDP? Pause the video and have a guess. This is basically the total value of goods and services your country has produced in a year. That's it. What's the value of everything you've made? And usually we like to compare it to last year or the year before. That's why on the news you always see GDP has grown or GDP has gone down. And basically countries aim to just produce more goods and services every year of higher value. And that would indicate economic growth and everybody's happy. If you looked at any of my previous videos, you would have come across this graph. Now, you don't have to reproduce this for GCSE, but it's still quite important for you to kind of understand. If we see an increase in aggregate demand in a country, it means either businesses or you personally or the government or people from abroad are buying more goods and services in your country. This moves the demand line forward, the aggregate demand line forward, and what can we see? We can see an increase in the price level, which means inflation, but also we can see a total output increase as organizations are now willing to produce more goods at these higher price levels. So this increase in production of goods and services is directly what economic growth is. We've produced more in a year than we did last year. And notice that the graph says real GDP. And we might get into this in a bit, but it's basically where we remove all inflation from this. Let's say if I sell a phone for $400 this year, and that same phone is $500 next year, well, I'm not producing more, am I? I'm selling the same goods for a higher price. We need to remove that inflation to really see if we're producing more or producing less. That's real GDP, basically. So yeah, to get into this in detail, let me just show you some concepts, okay? So what we're doing here is basically making 2011 the base year. And they like to choose any random year and make it a base year, and they give it a value of 100. They do this so it's really easy for people to see inflationary pressure year on year. It's just a simplified version of these numbers, basically. So we know that 2011 is going to be 100. So we give this year a base value of 100, and then using these average incomes, we can work out if the total value of goods and services is higher or lower year on year. So if you just see this in the newspaper, and we see these numbers continually going up, it shows that we consistently have economic growth. Because yes, GDP is equal to total value of goods and services produced, but that's also equal to total incomes in a country. They match. Income must equal total value of goods and services. Now, we can see here average incomes have increased, assuming the same population. We can see, look, index base has shifted up. And we can just basically base the percentage change on this from this 100, and we move backwards in this way, and we move forwards in this way. It's a really simplified way to see if we have growth or no growth. And what we can really see is just consistent growth throughout. And this only says minus 11 because it's minus 11 based on this initial figure of 100. All right, moving forward.
GDP sums up the prices of all finished goods and services. So that means that there are two ways that GDP can increase. First, prices can increase. In this case, the GDP number goes up, but the economy isn't actually producing more goods and services. It's inflation, which is driving the higher GDP. The increase in GDP, it might look good on paper, but it's a mirage.
So this is what I was just saying. Basically, the idea of nominal GDP, which is not real GDP, is that prices are going up. You're selling the same goods, but prices are higher. That doesn't mean you're producing more, does it? So it's fake. What we need to look for is real GDP, where we remove that inflationary pressure.
The other way that GDP can increase is if we do produce more valuable goods and services. And that could mean simply more goods and services or better goods and services.
So yeah, basically that's what this video comprises of. Really, really useful. I let my students watch the whole thing normally. Moving forward. So these distinctions are incredibly important, these definitions, and you should definitely make a mental note of these. It does come up in the exam quite frequently. So just know that real GDP here adjusts for inflation. Really, really important. Moving forward. Now let's calculate real GDP. So here's a quick way to calculate GDP growth, and we're looking at real and nominal GDP. We've got two items. We've got apples and we've got oranges. In year one, if we're calculating nominal GDP, we don't give a damn about inflation. Inflation is shown here, right? In year two, the prices have gone up significantly for both items, but we don't give a damn about that for calculating nominal GDP, just the number of items times the current price. So for that, we have 1,000 for here, 2,000 times 0.25 plus 1,000 times 0.5. And for here, we do 2,200 times 0.3 plus 1,200 times 0.7. So our nominal GDP growth from here to here is going to be plus 50%, right? But that's not the number we need. We need to see real GDP growth. So be very careful when a government says these words. Check between the words nominal and real. So for real, are we actually producing more? So what we do for real is we take the year 2 quantity that we produced and times it by the year 1 price. That way we completely remove inflation from the equation. So we do that with apples and oranges, and look what we get. 15% GDP growth. Still a great number. The country's doing really well. So you see this difference? Really important to understand. Now your turn. Pause this video for me and run the numbers. So for nominal GDP, did you get 150 to 270? I hope so. So that's 80%. But what about real GDP growth? Well, again, we times these 3 items by the prices in this year. And in year 2, we times these 3 items, our total production, by the original prices to remove inflation. So this is the same at 150, but in year 2, we get 185 running these numbers. So real GDP growth is 23%, the difference between this and this. Great amount of growth. Fantastic. What a great country. Right, moving forward. What are the causes of economic growth? We can see that nearly every country in the world has had significant economic growth from the 1990s onwards. And if you remember the old graphs that we looked at, economic growth is this total output, right? Real GDP. So what we need to see basically is a movement along this line, wherever the equilibrium moves to. So that would actually mean an increase in aggregate demand, total demand from everybody, or this line here, the aggregate supply. Producers need to be producing more. And if they produce more, this line moves here, equilibrium changes, and we have more economic growth. So just a quick recap then. What are the 4 kinds of spending that lead to aggregate demand increases? Can you remember? I've written them here in the equation. Pause the video and try and remember. The first one is consumer spending, then it's investment, then it's government spending, and then it's exports. Any of those 4 things lead to aggregate demand increases. But what about government policy? So if the government use monetary policy, they lower the interest rate for everybody. AD will shift out because more people and businesses are borrowing money and therefore spending more. Increased wages. If your wages go up, you've got more in your pocket at the end of the month. You're willing to spend more. Consumer confidence increases. Increased government spending, like I said. Devaluation of the currency. Your currency is now cheaper to buy, so people outside the country are going to buy more from you. Also, like I said before, consumer confidence. Are you confident? Do your friends all have jobs? Are businesses going well? Lower tax. If government charges you less tax, you've got more money. Businesses have more money, therefore they spend more. House prices going up. Lovely. If the value of my house goes from 100k to 200k, I feel richer, therefore I'm comfortable to spend more. And then finally, financial stability. If there's a good, stable system in society, banks will feel more comfortable lending money out. So we looked at AD just now. Now we're recapping AS. What shifts that forward to show us economic growth? There's so many things a government can do. Stop the video and think about these supply side policy ideas. A lot of students have problems with this, right? They can only think of 2 things. Okay, so for the short run aggregate supply for this, there are many reasons that can be employed to shift out this line, okay? And a lot of them come from government policies. The ones students tend to get the most are subsidies and reducing taxes. Okay, that's good. That gives an organization more money and they're able to reinvest and improve. And also, like a government directly giving them money through subsidies can lead to cheaper production overall. However, there are more. So we got our lower taxes, we've got our subsidies. But what about cheaper energy? This is a massive problem in the UK right now. Because of the war, prices of energy have gone up significantly, leading to loads of small businesses having to close, which is really sad. But China, for example, are investing heavily in power plants. And it's a very smart thing to do because if you can lower the cost of energy for businesses, production becomes way cheaper, businesses can thrive, survive, their overheads become lower. It's better for everybody. Better infrastructure. If a government builds subways that allow people to get around, and transport costs are lower, people are more willing to do different kinds of jobs. Training schemes as well. Maybe there's good training schemes on the go. And governments cutting regulation. Sometimes it can be so difficult to start businesses and get through all these procedures. I'd say it's easier in the UK than most, but in some countries I've seen it take months to set up a business. So cutting these regulations can help significantly. That's for short-run aggregate supply, moving forward. But for real long-run gains, we need increased capital, so we need more machinery being bought, more efficient machinery. We need immigration. More immigration leads to more people working, which means greater production. And if we can educate the people better, we can make them more productive in society and therefore have a higher production output. That will all lead to economic growth. So pause the video and quickly jot down some benefits of economic growth. This is a really common exam question. See what you got. Did you get higher incomes, therefore higher quality of life? More people having jobs means the government gets more tax money, which can be used to help society. Governments have less debt because they're taking in more tax money. More employment, more consumer confidence. And that consumer confidence leads to more purchases, means businesses have more profit, and more consumer confidence leads to people buying more from businesses, businesses having more profit. And when they have more profit, they reinvest more money and employ more people, and it becomes a positive economic spiral, and absolute poverty reduces. More money can be given to the poor to help them out. So here's a quick video on India. Now let's look at some of the issues that occur with economic growth, okay? Because they're growing massively, but we need to identify problems as well, because that's a common exam question for us to see.
India is facing an important election year, and outside of recent tensions with Pakistan, the economy remains a key campaign issue. India's economy is the fastest growing large economy in the world. It's also a big country with a big population. The United Nations expects India's current population of 1.3 billion to keep growing and surpass China by 2024. But it's got some big problems. A few years ago, the country's current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, promised to add 10 million jobs to help boost the economy.
So remember, add 10 million jobs. If you have 10 million jobs, what happens? Income increases, and then people have more consumer confidence and they're willing to spend more in society. So he's looking to directly promote economic growth for the country.
That hasn't really happened. The unemployment rate instead sits at a 45-year high. And GDP per capita, which is a measure of wealth across the country, lags behind rivals, like China, by a wide margin.
So we can see significant problems with employment.
Can India keep growing at such a fast pace? And if it does, at what cost? Here's how India became the fastest growing large economy in the world. India would open markets up to foreign competition, reduce the budget deficit, and eliminate restrictions on foreign investment, making it easier for entrepreneurs and Indian businesses to get funding.
So which kind of supply side policy was that? Do you remember? Reducing red tape, allowing them to trade with other countries.
And that process sort of continued till about 2004. All the command and control systems were dismantled. The foreign trade was opened up, and then Indian economy began to grow a bit faster, and particularly starting from about 2003, the economy really took off. So if you take about 15-year period from 2003 onwards, the economy grew almost 7.5%.
A big reason India's economy took off was because of the country's growing IT sector. Following the liberalized economy, Indian entrepreneurs quickly realized that the IT sector could become a lucrative business. Private engineering schools started popping up, creating large numbers of workers eager for jobs with lower salaries compared to US IT workers.
Okay, so think about this industry as well. IT, is it primary, secondary, or tertiary? It's tertiary. That's what makes the money these days, okay?
US companies, Citibank and Texas Instruments, took notice and hired some of the talent, validating the country's new sector. By 2007, India's IT sector was posting revenues of $23.5 billion. By 2018, it was bringing in $167 billion. IT companies are now India's biggest private employers. Another big reason why India's economy kept growing at such a rapid pace lies in simple demographics. India is home to more than 1.3 billion people, and much of the population is relatively young and working. Experts call it the demographic dividend. Asia's elderly population is expected to blow up in the coming years. India, however, is bucking that trend. It is now the sixth largest economy. The IMF predicts it could soon overtake the United Kingdom, its former colonizer, in total GDP output. But the country is facing a few hurdles. Job growth is a big one. India's current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, faces criticism for not adding the 10 million jobs he promised in his 2014 campaign. In November 2016, he suddenly announced that 501,000 rupee notes would be taken out of circulation. The economy faced a severe cash shortage, and some economists argue the move cost the economy about 1.5 million jobs. Despite India's reputation as a tech and services hub, the country's workforce remains largely in the informal sector. About 81% of India's workers ply their trades in the informal economy. That means jobs like street vendors, auto rickshaw drivers, or household help paid in cash. Some economists say,
So, paid in cash, meaning it's not registered as GDP because they're not paying tax on it. This is why they removed those notes in circulation, to help people transition to online sales, basically. So that can all be recorded and measured. Not very successful though, it seems. Quite a harsh measure.
if India wants to progress to a developed economy, it needs the informal sector to become better integrated with the financial sector.
A lot of the economy is actually in the informal sector. Just to give you an example, in India, 95% of enterprises in India employ 5 or fewer people. So these are really mom and pop stores. That's about the informality at which it operates.
While India's economy is booming, its unemployment rate is at a 45-year high, a sign that jobs are not being created at the same pace. Economists call this jobless growth. It's when the economy grows but generates jobs at a rate below its potential. The agriculture industry is a massive employer in India, but it's not seeing the same kind of growth as other sectors. That could lead to putting millions of young workers out of work. Experts say the unresolved issue of jobless growth and failure to reskill workers could hurt the economy in the future.
Indian job problem has to do with the availability of good jobs.
So again, reskill workers, another supply side policy where you can re-educate workers using government funds, or organizations can do it to get them up to speed with what's going on in the world. So this is what's needed.
Jobs that pay reasonable wages, and this is particularly true for workers at the low end of the wage distribution. That when you look at unskilled or low skilled workers, there are not enough well-paid jobs.
The World Economic Forum says India needs to work on infrastructure development and urbanizing regions of the country if it wants to stay on pace.
So look, difficult infrastructure and high degrees of pollution. These are problems that come with economic growth.
Poverty also remains a big problem. 12.4% of the country lives at the international poverty level, surviving on less than $1.90 a day. However, the country has made progress. In between 2005 and 2016, 271 million people moved out of poverty, halving the poverty rate to 28%. India's rapidly changing demographics may help it become an economic superpower, but it's also creating big obstacles.
So yeah, you can see the trash in the river there. And these are natural issues that occur with economic growth. It's very hard to have really good economic development and environmental sustainability with economic growth, and many countries are facing these problems. So what are the costs of economic growth to India? Can you quickly pause the video and write down what you got? So we have income inequality. We have really, really rich people and really, really poor people. And even though it claims that economic growth generally pulls people out of poverty, this is just creating massive income gaps and massive disparity in society, unless the government do something to increase the tax on the wealthy and redistribute that to the poor. The environment, like we saw from that river, is degrading. Hopefully new investment and new tech in the future can clean these rivers. We're overcrowding. We have lots of people moving from the countryside to big cities, and that creates slums if there isn't enough infrastructure to support these people. As we know, resource depletion, this happens all over the world. Africa has it with oil. Resources are being drained significantly from a country, and oftentimes they become dependent on these exports, and when they dry up, the country has really serious problems. Look at Venezuela, for example. Of course, high inflation. Prices are going up across the board when we see economic growth and increased production. Unless, of course, aggregate supply is so good that it pushes down the prices in society. We've seen that a lot with mobile phones over the years. All right, moving forward then. Now, after this real-life example, we're just listing the basic negatives of economic growth, because in the exam, that's what they tend to ask for. So we have inflation, inequality like we just saw with India, a current account deficit. This could mean that the country is basically spending more money on goods from abroad than they are receiving. That's all. We're going to go into the current account in detail at some point. Environmental costs, as we saw, environmental degradation. Really sad to see that. Resources being depleted, we already looked at that, and that's about it. So here's a real-life example. Overuse of water resources, drying up forests. Although China's done a really good job of trying to create forests in desert areas recently. Losing their resources from mining, reduced agricultural productivity. Now, this word, do you know what it means? You got to know what it means. So a recession is when we have a fall in GDP over 2 successive quarters. 1 quarter is 3 months. So we can see here, This is measured in certain periods, and we can see this is the 1st of the 8th, the 1st of the 3rd. So actually, if we decline in a 6-month period, then that is known as a recession, okay? This is where our total production of goods and services has fallen below this number here, 0. So there is an expectation that every 3 months we generally produce an amount more than we did in the last 3 months. And we can see here the country's always been successful. So look here, 0.2, right? This means we produce 0.2% more than we did in the previous measurement. This is actually really good for a country. Even though it doesn't seem that much, it's still showing a greater degree of production. And then on top of this increase, we have a further increase here. And this has been continuing like quite successfully until we hit the 2008 financial crisis, where we actually saw a massive decline. And when we hit into minus territory, where we're producing 4% less than we did in the last 6 months, this is a serious issue. And that's what we call a recession, okay? So we're producing less now than we did before. And this is represented by the PPF, if you remember that. Oftentimes what can happen is this line represents our production potential, the total amount we can produce in society of all of these goods, okay? Now, if we have a recession, we actually are operating at point B, meaning that we could operate at point A if all our factories were open and everybody was working, but that's not the case. That's not the case. We've got lots of people that are jobless and unable to work at that point in time. But if they can get jobs and all the factories open again, then we can hit this line. So certain things can push the recession. And if we look at this graph again, it's a really helpful example, okay? So aggregate demand could shift back or aggregate supply could shift back. So with demand shifting back, these are some of the reasons that could occur. Banks can't lend money to people or businesses. They no longer invest in the economy and buy things in the economy. Interest rates go up. People don't want to take loans out anymore. It's too expensive. Imagine the value of your houses go down. You're less willing to spend money now. Or if your real wages go down, your purchase power's gone down, you're going to spend less. All these things lead to aggregate demand decreases and can lead to a recession. There are other reasons as well. Consumer confidence going down. People are buying less of our products from abroad. That could be because it's more expensive now because our exchange rate's gone up, or maybe our products are less competitive than they were before. Government might be spending less, like we're seeing in America right now with Doge, or there might be a trade war, as we're seeing with China and America. So I like to ask students what happens in Thailand on the supply side. So let me just show you, you don't need to do the research. They've already done it for you. So, floods on the supply side. If there's floods in a country, this leads to reduced production or output. So we have a recession from that. COVID-19, as we know, 2020, ruined everything. Global supply chains were crushed. Production of goods and services reduced significantly. So ultimately, when we think of a recession in society, it's a reduction in economic growth, okay? And that means our real GDP has gone down. So when you finally think about this, okay, just remember that it's either the SRAS or the LRAS, which you don't need to know too much about yet. So just remember it's the aggregate supply shifting back or it's the aggregate demand shifting back. And if you can think about the variables that shift those backwards or forwards for economic growth, you'll be absolutely fine in the exam. And don't forget to think about the negatives of economic growth as well. Like we saw in India, we saw pollution, we saw the rich-poor gap increase, we saw the need for retraining and lots of unemployment because people aren't able to meet the demand skills in the market. All right, that's it for me. If you're interested in purchasing any of my resources, please click the link down below. Have a great day and I'll see you all again.